Okay, it's good to see you today. We're in the 2020 off season, and we're talking about the Detroit Lions today. Hope you're doing well. Appreciate you joining us. We are talking today about how much cap space the Lions have. We're going to talk about their top free agents that they have to make decisions on. We're going to talk about where they can find some more cap space if they want it. They may or may not want that extra cap space. We're going to talk about their team needs, and we're going to also start with how good were they in 2019. So a lot of things to look at. 2019, of course, 3-12-1. They got off to a 3-4-1 start. That start could have been even better. That wasn't a horrible start. They could have started off the season 4-4. They could have started off 5-3 without any real question about that. They didn't. 3-4-1 had them kind of on track for another 500 season. Maybe they could turn around pushing the playoffs. Then, of course, the Matthew Stafford injury happens. I don't usually like to hear much about injuries in the way of excuses for poor NFL play, except at the quarterback spot. There's really no way the NFL teams can have a quarterback who's good and have lined up behind him another quarterback who's good. Some teams are trying, but it's very difficult to do that. A lot of teams who could even put together a backup quarterback worry about split locker rooms. So it's just not something we're doing right now in the NFL. And very few teams could even find such a quarterback as a backup. So when you do have a guy like Stafford going out, there's a massive drop-off in offensive production. And, the result is you go 0-8 the rest of the way. And that's to be expected. There's just almost nothing you can do about that. You can always say next man up, let's all play harder and work as a team. But when your top quarterback, and Stafford is a very good quarterback in the NFL, when he goes down, when he gets injured for a season-ending injury, that's bad luck. That's just going to wreck your season. There's almost no way around that. There's very little NFL teams can do about that at this point. Some teams might find success in the future drafting another quarterback every season, every other season to kind of go in behind their starters. But in the Detroit Lions case, they just don't have that. So you saw the offensive yards per game and points per game. I think you were top 10 offense, top 12 offense with Stafford in there. I think you could have been a pretty steady top 10 offense all season. When Stafford goes down, though, you see the offensive numbers drop by about a touchdown per game, more or less. So you finish up with suppressed numbers, number 17 in yards per game and number 18 in points per game. So they still had a pretty good offense, but without Stafford to run it, it just doesn't run very smooth, just doesn't run very productively. Defense, though, was really the disappointing side. You can say all you want about the Stafford injury, and that pretty much shuts you down at 0-8. But once you get past the Stafford injury and you start looking around the room at what else was a problem, defense was a problem, and it really shouldn't have been. When you look at the Detroit Lions roster, they had a lot of pieces in place in the secondary, at edge rusher, good rotation at defensive tackle. They had a lot of pieces in place to where this should have been a good, solid defense. It wasn't. It was absolutely horrible. Number 31 in yards per game, number 26 in points per game. It was a train wreck on defense, and it's kind of easy to forget about that because you're looking over at the Stafford injury and just how debilitating that was for the offense. But the defense was a massive disappointment. And I think had the defense stepped up, you could have started off the year, at the 4-4 level or the 5-3 spot, and then had the defense been more consistent instead of being 0-8 right here, you might have finished up at 2-6 and been able to finish up around 500 even with Stafford out. But the defense really struggled. Now the fallout from that is that a lot of the secondary coaches and a lot of the strength and conditioning coaches got fired from that. I think there were about 6 guys that got fired over on the defensive side of the football during the offseason. And, I always hate to blame anybody for just one bad season, but I don't know what else you do here because the talent seemed to be there for Detroit to have a competitive defense, and it was not competitive at all in any way in 2019. And you can see that here with the numbers. And you go back and you look at guys' performances in 2017 and 2018, and you had every reason to think that this could be a solid defense, and it just wasn't. So fallout from that is they lose a lot of the guys, and then you start looking around and say, where can we upgrade the talent on defense? And we'll see more of that in a second. But that's what you were looking at in 2019. Heading into the 2020 offseason, how much cap space do you have? $47 million at this point. This right here, we are just on the cusp of the offseason getting started. That number is going to jump up and down almost daily like a stock ticker. So be prepared for you to hear all kinds of different numbers there. This is a very safe starting number right here at this point. Basically, all you've got to do here is add in your first round draft pick, which I think is going to cost you about $6.5 million. So after the first round draft pick, That's $6.5 million coming off. That'll put you at just over $40 million. Do I have other draft picks I've got to pay? Yeah, but when those guys take over at about $800,000 per on average, you lose about 6 guys out of that top 51 spot on your roster. So you really don't have to account for that, because the number basically cancels itself out. The 5 or 6 rookies who end up coming onto your team at an average of about $800,000 per player, they're going to replace about 6 other players who are also making about $800,000 under the league minimum. But the one thing you do have to account for is that really high first-round pick that you got, because the record ended up being so bad. You are going to have to pay that player about $6.5 million, no matter who it is. So you do have to account for that. So you got about 47 after your first-round draft pick. You're going to have about a little north of $40 million, and that, of course, includes the Harrison, already letting go of defensive tackle Harrison. They saved about $6.5 million, something like that, by releasing him. So you got a good amount of cap space to play with here. If you want more, you can get it. A lot of teams like to have a lot of cap space to work with. Other teams, and usually the better, more talented teams who have a lot of money already committed to players who are already very good, they're not necessarily looking to carve out massive amounts of cap space because they're already competitive. They already have good rosters. All they're looking to do is try to chisel out little pieces here and there to bring another good player on board, or maybe keep somebody around. If you want more cap space and you're the Lions, you can get it. Here are the ways. Darius Slay, cornerback. We've already heard all kind of rumors about him being traded or him wanting to be traded. I don't try to keep up with rumors at all. I try to deal with the facts and the numbers. We have heard consistently that a Darius Slay trade might be in the works, and we'll see about that. But he's making $13 million, which for a good cornerback, a good CB, is not a bad number. That's a pretty decent number for a CB for the Lions to have, who in 2017, 2018, even back in 2016, played really well, was one of the league's better cover corners. Now you dial it forward to 2019, and Slay has a disaster of a year really for him, and so did most of the Lions CBs. You look all around, but when you dial it back, you say, these guys were good in 17 and 18. Why weren't they good in 19? Well, in theory, we fired the defensive coaches, so in theory, we're blaming the defensive coaches for the lack of performance on defense in 2019. In theory, that would mean that you think you already had the players on the roster, which would then lead you to think, well, Darius Slay should come back pretty strong in 2020, provided we have a good defensive scheme and we make him and the other CBs comfortable with their roles and we don't confuse them, we don't ask them to do too much. Now, in spite of that line of thinking that I've just laid out there, we're consistently hearing the rumors and the possibilities that Darius Slay might be traded. If he is traded or released, which I doubt he's going to be released, but if he were to be traded, you would clear up $10 million in cap space very quickly right there that you could then use for somebody else in the market. And provided you get draft picks back here, then you've actually increased your assets. But you've lost a heck of a player here in Darius Slay. And I'm inclined to believe that a player who's been as good as Darius Slay, and age cannot be a factor. He's still a pretty young guy. I think he's in 25, 26-year-old neighborhood, 26, 27, something like that. Age can certainly not be a factor here for Slay. I don't think he's been slowed significantly by an injury over time, over 2 or 3 seasons. I think you're going to see Slay, no matter who he plays for, come back and play pretty well in 2020. At $13 million, this is a guy that I would like to keep around. I really don't want to create that hole at CB if I think he's going to come back and play well. We'll see what Detroit wants to do with that, though. They may very well be trading him, or he may very well want to be traded. If I'm Detroit, I'm really more interested in trying to give him a contract extension for the next 2 or 3 years. Not a 4 or 5 year deal, because I don't want to be on the hook for $30 million in case he does not come back as strong as he has in the past. I don't want to be on the hook for that kind of guaranteed money, but for 2 or 3 more seasons, I would love to try to bring Slay back and maybe even decrease my cap hit here for 2019. That's just what I would like to see out of Darius Slay and the Lions. Marvin Jones, if you want to clear $6.5 million of cap space, Jones is a pretty good receiver. You've got a pretty solid receiving core, and I don't know that you want to mess with that. But if the Lions start to look around for ways that they want to spend money in different places, this is another place they could do it. $6.5 million. not really something I would advise. I think they ought to keep Jones around for another season. I think he's a good, solid part of a good, solid offense. But you could, if you wanted to, when you start looking around the room at where can we save money at, excuse me, $6.5 million is the cap savings there on Jones. And then Kennard at linebacker, you could save $5.4 million there. I wouldn't be surprised if the Lions didn't let Kennard go, save that $5.4 million in cap space, even after a dead cap hit of about $2 million. You still got $5.5 million in clear cap savings there. So I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't let Kennard go, but we'll see what they want to do with that as well. They may decide that $47 million in cap space is enough, and they don't need to tinker around with it anymore. Team needs. We're going to quickly look at the strengths and weaknesses, and a couple of these to me are a little bit in the gray area. But at quarterback, I think you're fine. If Stafford comes back healthy, there's no reason, if Detroit wants to, that they can't draft a quarterback and keep Stafford around. It will not affect their money very much. I mentioned that their first-round draft pick is going to cost them $6.5 million this year. Whether it's a quarterback or whether they drafted a running back or whatever they want to draft, it's going to cost them $6.5 million. So the one thing we know is that Stafford is almost certainly, it would be hard to see the Lions letting him go this season because the dead cap hit is about $32 million, something like that. So whether Stafford's on the roster or not, he would cost you $32 million. He costs less than that to keep around for this season. So I know we're hearing rumors about Detroit drafting a quarterback, and they might just do that. But there's certainly every reason to believe that Stafford is going to be on the roster, and he's going to be the starter for this next season. It would be hard to envision him not being there. So you're fine at quarterback. At wide receiver, you're fine as well. Galladay and Jones, and you've got a pretty good, solid receiving core right there. So no reason to tinker with that if you don't want to. Tight end is an area that's a bit of a gray area. I think you're solid at tight end. You've got Hockenson, you've got Jesse James, and you've got a third guy there I can't remember at the moment. You're pretty good at tight end. You're not great at tight end. If Hockenson develops like you hoped that he would when you drafted him, if he develops, I think you've got a decent tight end core there. It's not awesome, but it's hard to see. It's hard to see Detroit making a move here at tight end because you just drafted Hockenson last year, and you've still got Jesse James tied up for a lot of money that you really can't get out of this season. So it's tough to see the Lions doing anything either in the draft or in free agency unless they maybe use a third or fourth round draft pick on a tight end, and then that guy's on the roster for next season when they could let Jesse James go and save a good bit of cap space. But it's really hard to see them making any kind of a major move here at tight end. And when you've got a pretty good wide receiving core like the Lions do, it takes pressure off of you having to be great at tight end. So I think they've got enough heading into this season at tight end where they're not going to make much of a move there. Running back, they've got guys here with Johnson. They've got guys here at running back who can run the football. They had McKissick, he's a free agent. They've got guys here who I think you feel good about them being able to run the football. The trouble is, they're not great at running the football, and they're really not very good pass-catching threats. You're not going to see them rack up a whole lot of catches out of the backfield, and even when they do, they're not the big play kind of threats that you really have to worry about as a defense. They're really just more safety outlets for Stafford to drop the ball off to. And, it kind of just ends there. You dump the ball off and you pick up 3 yards, and instead of, having an incompletion, you picked up 3 yards. I would like to see Detroit, I went back and forth with this over the last video that I made with them. They've got decent running backs, guys who can kind of sort of run the football to some degree, and they block pretty decently, but they're really not any kind of a pass-catching threat. And it's just in today's modern NFL, you like to have as many guys catching the ball from as many different spots as you can, and that way you just challenge and stretch defenses in every way possible, deep and horizontally, and even behind the line of scrimmage, the defenses have to watch out for bubble screens and things like that. It just really helps to have those extra weapons here, and if you don't have that at running back, and Detroit really doesn't, it's just an extra weapon that you don't have. So it would be interesting to see Detroit try to upgrade here at running back. Not the most important thing in the world in today's NFL. It's just a nice weapon to have there. And it would be a little different if you had guys who were just eating up a lot of yardage in the running game, but they're really not. You look at the Detroit Lions, they've got a good passing game. It should open up a few running lanes, and Detroit really doesn't run the ball for a great amount of force either. So since you're average at the running game here with the running backs that you have, since you're average there at the running game, and you're actually way below average for running back catching the ball out of the backfield, it would be nice to see Detroit step up and pick out somebody at running back, either down there in the draft, third, fourth round, or pick up a veteran free agent, somebody cheap, not going to cost you a lot of money, $2-3 million, to try to get you another weapon there in the running back position. You move to the offensive line. Offensive line's in good shape. You got some money decisions to make, but the offensive line's in good shape. You had, I think, one of the better offensive lines of football last year. It's not an elite offensive line, but the depth is there, the width is there. You've got starters pretty much at every position. In a couple of places, you have what I think are close to elite guys, very, very good players. Here at tackle, with Decker, you've got Decker there on one side. Tackle, you're fine. I don't think you're great at tackle, but you're solid at tackle. When you move over to guard center, you're fine there as well. You've got a free agent decision here to make with Glasgow, but Glasgow's just been a real solid rock there for you on the interior of the offensive line. You're very good there at offensive line. You could save a little bit of money if you wanted to by releasing Wagner. We'll see if Detroit wants to do that. I didn't put that down. But you've got probably more depth on the offensive line than most teams do in the NFL. So you're fine there. Nothing there to worry about. You just do have a couple of financial decisions to make right here with Glasgow. You move over to the defensive side of the football. I said this was horrible last year, and it was, but really at CB and safety, if you can pull out of what you saw in 2019, and if you look back at the guys who performed at safety, and I'm talking about Darius Slay over at CB, and I'm talking about Walker and Wilson here at safety in 2018 and 2017, these were guys that performed very well. And so in my opinion, you don't have to do anything here at CB and safety if you don't want to. I think you've already got guys in place who should be able to perform. If you want to add somebody to that, add another safety to that, add another CB to that, I certainly think that's something you could look at to upgrade. But you're not in a danger zone here at CB and safety, in spite of the fact that you did give up a lot of passing yards. I think, and the Lions probably feel the same, that probably has more to do with scheme and getting guys in roles that they should be in than it does have to do with talent. So we'll see what they want to do with that moving forward. Linebacker, not a good position, but that's not unusual. We're seeing that a lot in the NFL. We are seeing a lot of players, a lot of teams right now in the NFL who at linebacker really struggling, and it's kind of becoming not the forgotten position, but the least important position on defense. We're seeing a lot of teams whose linebacker core not only is not getting as many snaps on the field anymore, but they're not very good at rushing the quarterbacks. They're not very good at stopping the run. They're not very good at pass coverage, and therefore they're just not getting on the field as much because a lot of teams are switching over to more guys in the secondary, more guys who can just flat out cover, and we'll take our chances in the running game and use our front four to get pressure on the quarterback. But now, if you do want to upgrade here at linebacker, that would be a quicker way to try to help yourself out on defense, because certainly you're not any good here at linebacker with just about anybody that you have. Defensive tackle was actually a decent spot last year, but because you've released Harrison, that leaves you really thin there. And so what I think was a pretty solid position there at defensive tackle with A'Shawn Robinson and Damon Harrison, they released Damon Harrison in order to save about $6.5 million in cap space. So that now becomes a position of need, because Robinson himself and the other guys that you have are not going to be able to hold that down. So you really need to do something here at defensive tackle, or you're going to be bleeding there this year. And you were halfway decent there last year with Harrison there filling in and with Robinson as well. You hope to see Robinson step up and play better, certainly, but it just leaves you thin there at defensive tackle. So they really need to do something there at defensive tackle. Edge is a weird position because you're paying a lot of money to Flowers. Trey Flowers stepped up, had a good season last year, came over from New England. You always worry about Patriots players going to other teams. Are they going to continue to play well, or are they just going to be good there in New England? They came over from New England, had a very good season. No reason to expect he won't have another good season this year. After that, though, there's a massive drop-off. You don't really have a lot behind Flowers, so if you're looking to get more pressure on the quarterback, this is one place to do it. Whether you hit that in the draft or through free agency, you're probably not going to find too many edge rushers in free agency that you not have to pay a lot of money for. But if you want to try to find a way on the draft to get some pressure on the quarterback, either defensive tackle or defensive end, one or the other, this would be a place where the Detroit Lions could use it. So even though you got Flowers there, he's a guy who can get pressure on the quarterback. You'd like to have somebody besides Flowers and besides Robinson. You'd like to have somebody there on that defensive line who can take some more pressure off of Flowers and get pressure on the quarterback. And it just gives teams fewer options to try to double team Flowers so much consistently week in and week out. So that's what we're looking at here in the overall offensive. You're pretty good. Defensive, even though I think you're decent on the safety and CB, you could upgrade there. Definitely, though, I think you need to address the defensive tackle spot here moving forward. I picked out what were the top 6 free agents for the Detroit Lions. If I left somebody off that you think is important, by all means, hit me up in the comments. I don't mind. Sometimes you look at guys who don't get a lot of playing time, they still have pretty good value. Guys who may only get 200 or 300 snaps. We see guys like that in the NFL, and those guys financially are not big decisions because usually those guys are making about $1 million per season, $1.5 million per season. I tried to pick out the people who would have bigger financial implications here for the Detroit Lions. Detroit doesn't have as many free agents. Most NFL teams, I've said this in like every other video I've done, most NFL teams have 25 to 30 free agents. Not Detroit. They've got, I think, maybe 18 to 20 free agents that they're looking at, and then I picked out the top 6 for them. So Glasgow's the big one by far. He's the guy who has been a rock, an absolute rock there. And it's hard to see. I think $11 million is a pretty good guess about what he'll get. It's hard to see him getting any less than $10 million a season. He's still young, I think 24 or 25 years old. So he's still very young. But I think $10 million per season, you won't see him get any less than that if he signs a deal with Detroit. If he were to hit free agency, I think you might see his cap number climb up to $12 or even $13 million. We'll see what happens there. But Glasgow's a guy you got to make a decision on. And a lot of NFL teams would just automatically pay Glasgow and move on. But you have to ask the question. We've had a good offensive line with Glasgow on his rookie contract. That is a very low pay rate. If we start taking money from other places and giving it to Glasgow in order to keep the offensive line that we've had the whole time anyway, and we still haven't been able to put together winning seasons, are we actually going to get better by paying $11 million a season to Glasgow, or are we actually going to get worse? Now, there's a theory out there, and it's really kind of a pitiful theory. There's a theory out there that the money's always there to pay guys like Glasgow, because you lose somebody like Harrison off the team from defensive tackle, or you get rid of somebody like Slayer Jones, and so you just take that money and you move it over to a different spot. But the important thing to remember there is that you haven't gotten better. All you've actually done is lose a guy like Harrison in order to keep a guy like Glasgow, and people kind of miss the part where we improve the team. Because, oh, by the way, Detroit hasn't been very good and hasn't had many playoff appearances in a long time. So if all you're looking to do is sell tickets and keep competing for a 500 level record and try to find a way to head yourself into the playoffs, this is fine. But if you're looking to compete, be in the playoffs, and get to that next level, the Super Bowl, you have to stop and question everything. You have to analyze everything, and you have to ask the question, by letting go of a guy like Harrison at defensive tackle and creating a hole here at defensive tackle, and if we decide to trade Slay and we create a hole here at CB, and we take part of that money from releasing Harrison and Slay and we devote it right here to Glasgow, how did we get better? Or did we actually just get worse, and now we're trusting ourselves with these draft picks to be able to somehow draft better than we've ever drafted before and make up the difference? And these are important questions. You say, well, if you release Glasgow, you've created a hole as well. Yes, but what you can do with that money, because that money has never been there before for Glasgow, what you can then do with that money, which, by the way, Detroit's got a pretty solid offensive line. You could keep Slay right here at CB. Harrison, I don't think you're going to miss a lot, except it just creates a problem in terms of depth. You could then use a first-round draft pick on defensive tackle. He could probably, if he's good enough, probably step in and begin to play right away. And because Harrison wasn't a star, you're not going to miss anything there at defensive tackle. And what do you do with the hole there at guard? Well, you can bring back the guys that you already have because you already had a lot of depth there. Are you going to become a little worse on the offensive line? The answer is yes. You're not going to be able to quickly and easily replace a guy like Glasgow, but then with next year's draft, you can start to look at replacing him. But with the depth that you have on the offensive line, and you've got a lot of it, I said that you were probably deeper on offensive line because you put a lot of draft picks into the offensive line over the last few seasons. Because of the depth that you have there on offensive line, you're not going to miss Glasgow as much as you would miss having a CB, especially if Slay comes back and plays the way that we saw him play in 17 and 18. A lot of people don't agree with that, and that's fine. A lot of people around the NFL see it just the opposite. They look at Slay here at $13 million a season. Didn't play well last year. We're going to cut him, save $10 million. We're going to draft cornerback in the draft. We're going to take that money and sign Glasgow and keep the offensive line good. And I certainly understand that, so we'll see which way Detroit wants to go with that. I suspect they'll do everything they can to keep Glasgow, and I can hardly blame them for that. He's a good player. He's a young player. He's been a rock there on the offensive line. Once you move past Glasgow, the numbers really start to fall off, and I can't say for certain what these players will make. This is just kind of a feel for it. Wilson here at safety, I think for about $4 million, you could probably get him back. He's not one of the better starting safeties in football. We know that, but he's been decent. He's been solid. This is a guy who's been pretty solid. And for $4 million, even if you decide in the second or third round to draft somebody else at safety, and that guy turns out to be good enough to beat out Wilson for the starting spot, $4 million is a pretty good value here to have somebody in the secondary who can step in and nickel and dime and just cover somebody. It's one of the most valuable traits in the NFL right now is cover guys. And so for $4 million, you could keep Wilson on the team. I think for probably a little bit less than $4 million, you could keep him there. It would create depth. You have somebody there who has started for you before, and even if you decide to upgrade through the draft at safety somewhere in the second or third round, and he does become a starter, that's just more value to your team. Mike Daniels here, we've seen him over the last 2 seasons. His production has really fallen off. Last year, of course, for Detroit. We know what he used to be in Green Bay. I don't think that he's ever going to be that again. His production really just seems to have fallen off over the past 2 seasons. He's not starting many games. He's playing very little. So last year, he made about $8 million. He's not going to be making that this year. There's just no way. I think you can bring him back for $3 million. He's a big guy. If you want to try to bring him back and help out with that defensive tackle depth problem that you have, it just takes a little bit of pressure off you if you're not able to find who you want free agency. If you're not able to find who you want in the draft at defensive tackle, listen, we can all day talk about drafting somebody at defensive tackle, but if he's not there, if the guy you want just isn't there, sometimes you have to draft somebody else. And you can always talk about signing a free agent defensive tackle and plugging that hole, but if the guy you want is going to cost you a lot more than you want to pay, having somebody like Mike Daniels to combine with Robinson there at defensive tackle creates just a little bit of depth, takes a little bit of pressure off, and for probably $3 million, I'm guessing there, that's quite a fall off from $8 million, but Daniels' production has really fallen off to match that. For probably $3 million there, you bring a guy back who is big, who has shown that he's going to be great in the past, but it's been a couple of seasons now, and you just create a little bit of depth there. You bring in some veteran experience there. Don't really want Mike Daniels starting. Don't expect him to start, but it does create that depth, gives you more options there for Detroit. Kearse, this was a guy here who I thought could have really added to your wide receiver position last year. It was good anyway. And then he goes and he gets injured and misses the whole season in just a brutal injury. Don't know if he's healthy coming back or not. Haven't followed the reports on him. Don't know how healthy he is. If he's healthy, if he can show teams that he can play and he can practice and he steps up in the workouts and shows teams that he is healthy, he could probably pull down about $2 million this season. Just adds again to your depth there. It's nice to have a guy at the 4 spot who could be as good as Kearse has been at times. Don't know if he'll be that good coming back, but for $2 million, you could have him back if you want him. Abushi there at tackle. This again here is just a depth issue. And these depth issues get to be important. I mentioned at the outset that I don't like to hear about injury excuses in the NFL at any position other than quarterback, because injuries in the NFL are a way of life, and you have to prepare for it. And the way you prepare for it is by bringing guys in like Ibushi for $1 million, bringing guys in like Daniels for 3, Wilson for 4. This is how you prepare for injuries. And late in the season, weeks 13 and 14 and 15, when everybody is scrapping and clawing for a playoff spot or for playoff seeding, if you've actually had a good season, and somebody goes down, because they always do, and it's always one of your better players, because your better players are on the field for a greater length of time, they are more likely to get injured than the backups. And when those guys go down, it's these decisions right here that really begin to affect, and that's where depth is important. As the season wears on, you like to have a guy there who you've seen before, who's familiar with the system. No, he's not your regular starter, but he can step in, and you don't have this huge drop-off, and you don't have a weak point for other teams to begin to attack. So having Ibushi here at the guard tackle position, he can move around there on the offensive line. Having him for $1 million would be nice if Detroit wants to do that. Sam Martin here, the punter. Don't put many punters and kickers on the free agent spot here, on the free agent lineups when I'm doing these videos. Sam Martin, there was a time when Sam Martin was among the best guys in the NFL at punter, and he does kickoffs as well. That time has passed, and he's not an old guy. He's only about 6 or 7 years into his career, but we've seen his numbers start to tail off here. His touchback percentage was way down, I think around 27% last year. We've seen his numbers begin to just really tail off this past year. So I don't know if Detroit's looking to replace him or not, but his punt distance numbers and his kickoff numbers have all shrunk. So whereas he used to be one of the better punters and kickoff guys in the NFL, now he's way down there at the other end of the spectrum. And we're not talking about a large yardage difference, but when you start looking at where he is, he has moved down quite a bit on the rankings. He's somewhere down there around number 25, number 26 out of the punters and the kickoff specialists in the NFL. So for $3 million, you could have him back, but Detroit may well be looking to replace that and get that touchback percentage way back up to where he used to have it at, and we'll see what's going on there with Sam Martin in the offseason. All right, so that's a lot there to digest. Thank you for watching today. We'll see you next time. Hope you have an excellent day. Goodbye.